And we all know that certain people try to disregard, downplay, and outright omit the struggles, achievements, and history of ADOS. For those of you who are unfamiliar with the term, it means American Descendants of Slaves, an important category of American citizen that delineates from the other demographics that may occupy Black or African American in colloquial use. Well, those people have spent a long time doing this to Black people since slavery to the modern day. And we aren't just talking about the KKK, organizations like the Daughters of the Confederacy, who pushed the lost cause narrative in Southern schools as part of the education curriculum. They were very boisterous and very loud, and they disrupted your local boards of educations. Interesting, but where have we seen this before in modern times?
But critics say they also use misinformation to push fears that kids are being indoctrinated to hate America and steered towards topics like transgender identities. A document on the Wisconsin State Chapter website makes unsubstantiated claims such as kids are being taught to pit racial groups against each other. Goal, to teach kids to hate America so they will destroy it. You think that's what's going on in public schools?
I think some public schools, that's absolutely going on.
Moms for Liberty? Yeah, more like the granddaughters of the Confederacy. But apparently that name didn't go over well in the focus groups. Everything from Jim Crow to the Civil Rights Movement. Even today, there have always been shitbag human beings trying to thwart, whitewash, or delegitimize ADOS excellence, initiative, and valor. And just a side note, it wasn't until the 1980s that discrimination in banking based on race was enforced by the federal government. Before, it was in a limbo area. Even to this day, you can see housing appraisal companies giving wildly different values depending on the ethnicity of the owner during the walkthrough. Black people also get a higher interest rate with the same credentials as a white counterpart. This all comes to a head during the first month of Trump's second administration. Someone had the balls to rewrite the National Park Service's website on the Underground Railroad and thought people wouldn't notice.
Move along. Move along.
The National Park Service has reserved edits and restored content to its webpage about Harriet Tubman and the Underground Railroad in the wake of news reports and public backlash over the changes. Changes to the Underground Railroad page on the National Park Service website were made without the approval of NPS leadership nor department leadership. NPS spokeswoman Rachel Paulwitz said late Monday in an email. The web page was immediately restored to its original content. She did not say who ordered the changes or for what reason. The changes, first reported by the Washington Post, included removing Tubman's picture from the top of the page and making multiple edits to the text. Now, we are going to go through this, but first, I want you to take a look at this image, and then look at the next. Looks like the Trump administration is only for DEI when it involves plastering white people all over a staunchly ADOS historical event. Don't get me wrong, there were white people that helped, but they weren't the face of the movement like Harriet Tubman. NPS put Harriet Tubman as the face originally, but apparently the for brains at the White House didn't like that. So let's read what is said on the original page. The Underground Railroad, the resistance to enslavement through escape and flight through the end of the Civil War, refers to the efforts of enslaved African Americans to gain their freedom by escaping bondage. Wherever slavery existed, there were efforts to escape. At first to maroon communities in remote or rugged terrain on the edge of settled areas, and eventually across state and international borders. These acts of self-emancipation enabled slaves as fugitives, escapees, or runaways, but in retrospect, freedom seekers is a more accurate description. Many freedom seekers began their journey unaided, and many completed their self-emancipation without assistance. But each subsequent decade in which slavery was still legal in the United States, there was an increase in active efforts to assist escape. Now, that was pretty long, right? What do you think that they did on the Whitewash page? The Underground Railroad flourished from the end of the 18th century to the end of the Civil War, was one of the most significant expressions of the American civil rights movement during its evolution over more than 3 centuries. The Underground Railroad bridged the divides of race, religion, sectional differences, and nationality, spanned state lines and international borders, and joined the American ideals of liberty and freedom expressed in the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution to the extraordinary actions of ordinary men and women working in common purpose to free a people. Where does that say enslavement? Where does that say escape? Where does that say self-emancipation? In no place does it do that. This is a complete downplay on the struggles of enslaved black people to write them out of history and make the effort seem unimportant, as if everyone else besides the slave owners were on board with it. American civil rights movement? Are you kidding me? Civil rights didn't come till much later, unless this knuckle-dragger thinks that in some up way that abolition equals civil rights. This is like calling the American Revolution the U.S.'s mild disagreement with England, or the localized strike on Hiroshima instead of the nuclear bomb. It doesn't hit the point, and if anything, it just glosses over it, delegitimizing it in history.
Rapunzel, look in that mirror. You know what I see? I see a strong, confident, beautiful young lady. Oh, look, you're here too.
And if you've read on the subject, you know that it is utterly wicked and the stuff of nightmares what those black slaves had to endure. Roots makes it palatable for white audiences. But pick up a copy of Incidents in the Life of a Slave Girl and then ask yourself if Roots did the history justice. Incidents in the Life of a Slave Girl is in public domain. There is nothing stopping you. Hell, I'll even put it in the description. You could read the book and tell me if this disgrace of a rewrite was worth it. The decision to assist freedom seekers may have been spontaneous. However, in some places, especially after the Fugitive Slave Act of 1850, the Underground Railroad was deliberate and organized. Despite the illegality of their actions, people of all races, class, and genders participated in this widespread form of civil disobedience. Freedom seekers went in many directions: Canada, Mexico, Spanish Florida, Indian Territory, the West, Caribbean islands, and Europe. Funny how this just gets left out entirely in the whitewashed piece. Gee, I wonder why it advocates for civil disobedience even when there's a federal mandate that's passed down. Nope, you can't have the people thinking their government is a piece of shit and taking matters into their own hands. Can't have that.
Chairman of the Armed Services Committee, Vice Chairman of the Republican Party. What does your father do, William?
Contractor.
According to this, he owns the 3rd largest construction company in the world.
Yeah, he's a contractor.
My boys, many of them, they have a real problem with authority.
Are you with me or not?
Of course we're with you.
But if you get a shot, we're gonna be PO'd.
Well, unless you disagree with a fair election and you're a Republican, I guess that's okay. And what about the Fugitive Slave Act of 1850? That was completely missing from the whitewashed piece. Well, let's take a look at what it said. The Fugitive Slave Act of 1850 was a part of the Compromise of 1850, required that the United States government actively intervene to help slave owners regain control of their slaves. This act dictated that fugitive slaves were neither allowed to testify on their own behalf, nor were they allowed to have a trial by jury. Moreover, federal marshals who refused to enforce the law and individuals who helped slaves to escape were heavily penalized and were fined $1,000. Furthermore, special commissioners were given concurrent jurisdiction with U.S. courts enforcing this act. This was determined to be wildly corrupt, for these special commissioners were paid $10 to rule in favor of the slave owners, but they only received $5 if they sided with slaves. Wouldn't you think this is an important footnote on the history of the Underground Railroad? $1,000 in 1850 roughly translates to $41,000 in 2025. Also, being heavily penalized meant jail time. This also meant that special commissioners were paid $410 for ruling in favor of the slave owners and were paid $205 for ruling in favor of slaves. So next we're going to look at these two pieces side by side, and I'm going to read the whitewash version first, and then I'm going to read the last sentence at the end because it's the only thing that changes, and we're going to see how it's different, okay? And I'm going to tell you before we do that. Using ingenuity, freedom seekers drew on the courage and intelligence to concoct disguises, forgeries, and other strategies. Slave catchers and enslavers watched for runaways, unexpected routes of escape, and used the stimulus of advertiser rewards and official legislation to encourage public complicity and apprehension. Now, here's the sentence. Support came from sympathetic individuals from various backgrounds who opposed slavery and aided freedom seekers in their quest for liberty. That's what the whitewash sentence said. Now, let's read what the original sentence said. Help came from diverse groups, enslaved and free blacks, American Indians, and people from different religious and ethnic groups. Well, damn, if you read that last line of text, you would have thought that everyone was against slavery and the only people who wanted it were the slave owners. Instead, the original groups were the ones actively responsible for helping the freedom seekers. Do you know why there is Baptist and Southern Baptist churches? They are different. Well, in 1845, the Southern Baptists decided to separate from the Triennial Convention to support what they called an Institute of Heaven, slavery. And it took until 1995, 150 years later, for them to apologize for the, slavery being bad and all thing. Baptists, on the other hand, opposed slavery, and some of them were the most outspoken abolitionists of the time. A perfect example of this would be Cassius Clay. The issue comes amid sweeping government changes to comply with President Donald Trump's campaign against so-called diversity, equity, and inclusion policies in the federal government. Trump has also targeted the Smithsonian network of museums, which includes the National Museum of African American History and Culture. He has tasked Vice President J.D. Vance with heading up the effort to purge what Trump termed improper ideology in the Smithsonian's depiction of American history. And whatever could that mean, Diaper Don, that you don't want anything dark, whether it's skin or deed, in our U.S. history books? Does that make you uncomfortable? Because it should. Does that make you a little restless? It should. You don't get to take the bad thing that happened, whitewash it, or erase it from history, and then say, yeah, that's how it happened.
Did I falsely imprison those animals? Well, yes, I did. It was a classic doing the wrong thing for the right reason kind of a deal.
Too many here, myself included, will fight you tooth and nail on this. And what exactly is improper ideology in this case? What does that even mean? It sounds like Diaper Don is asking the couch fucker to shield his eyes from the truth. Among the public controversies has been the Pentagon's wholesale deletion of pages related to the Navajo Code Talkers' contributions in World War II and baseball legend Jackie Robinson's military career. When the Harriet Tubman edits first came to light, MPS officials acknowledged the changes but denied any intention to downplay her role or soften the realities of America's history with slavery. The revelation of the MPS edits drew an immediate backlash from civil rights figures. Bernice King, daughter of the Reverend Martin Luther King Jr., posted on Instagram Monday that the changes constitute an attack on truth, an attempt to erase history that would help us improve society today, a refusal to be uncomfortable. This is not good. This is not normal. This is the modern-day equivalent of book burning at a government level to strike the stains of the U.S. record. Germany uses the Nazis as a means of teaching their people how not to be pieces of shit. Japan teaches about imperialism and the devastation it leaves behind. Side note, those YouTube videos telling you that they don't teach anything on World War II are lying. It's in their social studies textbooks. I should know. I've lived here for 14 years. Why should we be any different? Slavery was bad. ADOS still deal with the cultural awareness from slavery until now. We aren't talking about ancient history. We're talking about 160 years ago. That's like 3 or 4 generations ago. And if we're just talking about civil rights, we are only talking about 62 years ago. This is clear and present. And it makes sense because The people who threw rocks at Ruby Bridges for trying to go to school are now upset that their grandchildren might learn about them throwing rocks at Ruby Bridges for trying to go to school. And the more we let people whitewash and erase them, the harder it's going to be to get reparations for ADOS. I wholeheartedly support and advocate for ADOS reparations. I advocate for what is right, what is fair, what is just, and what is right don't always coincide, but I will always stand for what is right over the others. Wake the f*** up, America. Without pushback, the diaper dictator and the serial couch f***er will gladly burn your history books while you idly watch. Hi there, this is Desperado Sensei with FOFA News. We just like to remind you to like and subscribe for our content, and also follow us on Substack. Every now and then we write pieces that don't necessarily turn out to be videos, so check us out when you get a chance. Thank you. Bye.